Okay, welcome everybody in person and also online. I am Dr. Kyle Schreiber. I am co-director of the Center for Analytic Criminology here at the Institute of Criminology in Cambridge, and I'm very delighted to welcome Dr. Hardy and Dr. Trivedi Bateman, who I will refer to as Nima and Beth because I know them from these names, to our institute to talk about their SATNAV project. I am delighted to have them here because both have contributed significantly to the work that's going on in the Center for Analytic Criminology. One of our main aims within the center is to advance theory-guided research through empirical theory testing and development, but also ultimately through application of the knowledge that's gained through that empirical study about the causes of crime to intervention. And Beth and Nima have contributed to all elements of this work and this type of criminology that we are pursuing. So both have been integral to the Peterborough Adolescent and Young Adult Development Study, PADS+, which is a study that is housed within the Center for Analytic Criminology and which is testing Situational Action Theory, which is one of the major productions of the center. So Nima and Beth have both served as researchers on the project and research managers for many years. In fact, yesterday we realized it's Beth's 20th anniversary of working with the center, and there are pictures of our evening when she first joined it upstairs on the center wall, if you want to go and see that. And Nima as well has worked for a long time on the project over many of the waves of the study. They've also contributed through their empirical research to testing SAT. And I'm delighted that now they're continuing on that work in terms of applying it to intervention. So Nima has taken a first step towards that with the Compass project, which has been applying some of the guidance from SAT and the empirical support for that in looking at morality and moral education. And then Beth has also then extended this into another component of the Compass project, the SATNAV project. So we have the SATNAV Compass project, and that will be what Nima and Beth are going to be presenting to us today. So I'm very delighted to have them to do so.
So first off, what is SATNAV? SATNAV is a comprehensive schools-based program of change centered around individual personal morality and moral contexts. So I want to start with an anecdote about how SATNAV started. In summer 2020, I was on Twitter and I was witnessing a hotly debated discussion between education practitioners around what I would call draconian control regimes that were being advocated in schools that were experiencing endemic behaviour problems. And I piped up and said that the evidence base from criminology didn't support those kind of behavioural control measures. And one practitioner piped up in response and said that his experience in schools was that he also agreed and he would like to know more about our work and the evidence base. So we got in touch, and those initial discussions actually led to what SATNAV is today and set us on the path. And he is actually one of the key practitioner partners now for SATNAV. So that's how we started. Today, we're going to introduce the background and approach to SATNAV and the main principles of the programme and what it's about. And then we're going to introduce each of the components of the SATNAV programme and tell you about each one before discussing some ideas from the future. And importantly, we want to allow lots of time for your feedback and questions, obviously, but more importantly, your feedback and anything you can share with us. So, as you may know, would have guessed from Nima and my backgrounds, as well as being hosted by the Center for Analytic Criminology, as Carl said, SATNAV is rooted in analytic criminology and in particular situational action theory. I've only got a brief outline for you today, but I'll show you how these foundations really underpin the development of the SATNAV programme. So SATNAV is designed for schools and initially, at least, to help schools reduce problem behaviour. And there are two fundamental points here. The first is that all behaviours we're concerned about in school, whether that's cheating on a test or violent behaviour or even extreme behaviours such as crime, they all have one thing in common, and that is that they break a moral rule. Moral rules are rules of conduct about what it's right or wrong to do and are generally agreed upon in society. For example, they're codified in laws, and they're also agreed upon sometimes in schools in terms of being codified within behaviour policies. The second point is that in order to effectively change something or reduce something, you really need to understand the causes of what's making that thing happen in the first place. And as Kyle mentioned, at the Center for Analytic Criminology, we've spent many years researching the causes of crime. under P.O. Vikström, who's here today, thank you. I'm now putting that work into practice, working with secondary schools to see whether our knowledge can make a difference on the ground. Kyle mentioned the PADS Plus study based at the Centre for Analytic Criminology, and quite a few of the measures used in SATNAV used those scales developed for PADS Plus, so I'll be talking a bit about that later. So for schools to effectively manage and reduce adolescent rule-breaking behaviour, we need to understand the causes of that behaviour. So I'm going to briefly outline Situational Action Theory's explanation of behaviour to you now. So behaviour is a series of actions, and acts are carried out by individuals. The individuals are acting in environments and in their immediate surroundings. And in schools, this is the classrooms, corridors, lunch hall, toilets, outside spaces, and so on. And behaviour is the result of a student interacting with and responding to their environment. This person-environment interaction might sound obvious, but it's actually a crucial fact about the causes of behaviour that's often missed or sidelined in policies designed to manage behaviour, both within crime prevention, but also within school behaviour policies. And because of the importance of this interaction for action, we cannot separate students and environments when thinking about managing behaviour and behaviour policy, and we must address both. So remember, moral rules are rules about conduct. School problem behaviours are generally breaking moral rules. Therefore, when we're talking about behaviour management, we're talking about preventing acts of rule breaking. And to talk about this as moral rule breaking is important because individual students and school environments each have their own moral rules. In the case of personal morality, that is their own moral rules about right and wrong, and also their moral emotions such as shame and guilt. And in the case of school environments, they also have their own moral rules. In some cases, this is moral rules encoded in school codes of conduct and so on, but it's also actually the moral rules of the staff and the students who are present in the moments in those settings in school. The next important point is that moral rules can vary. So personal morality can be pro or antisocial. Moral rules, a person's moral rules can be more or less aligned with the law or the school rules. For example, for many reasons, which we won't touch upon today, some students will have a personal morality that is completely out of line with school rules, for example. But also, school-wide and school setting moral rules can also be pro or antisocial. That might sound a little bit less intuitive, and that's because schools have code of conduct or similar that cover the whole school, but also the environments within a school can still vary. So, for example, immediate environments include others present in the vicinity, such as other students and staff, and there can obviously be informal codes of conduct among peers and things. That means that within a school, even classrooms and corridors, for example, have completely different moral contexts. And even some places, the same places at a different time of day could be different depending on who is there and what activity is going on. So we have varying students and varying schools and school settings. And the moral rules of students and school settings, they can either be broadly aligned or corresponding, or they can be in conflict. And this is obviously a simplification of the detail of these processes, which when they interact has this either correspondence or conflict has implications for the resultant behaviour. And so I'm going to simplify this for you now. First, I'm going to start with the moral correspondence, the idea that both the setting and the person are in a kind of agreement, in alignment in terms of their moral rules. In the case of antisocial moral correspondence, where both the moral rules of the setting and that of the student are not in line with the school rules or even the law, that means that in situations like this, antisocial behaviour is the likely outcome. But in the opposite case of pro-social moral correspondence, where both the individuals and the school rules are discouraging antisocial behaviour, then antisocial behaviour is unlikely. And obviously this is optimal because both are in line and the behaviour that we want to see results. But we also have situations of conflicting moral guidance, and that's these opposing corners here. In this case, oh sorry, I forgot to show the with that. In the case of the moral conflict, Here we might have an antisocial environment and, a pro-social student in an antisocial environment. And here the rule breaking depends on the young person's ability to hold true to their own moral values in the face of external pressure to act otherwise. And that could be things like peer pressure. So how they behave is then dependent on their own self-control. And in this final scenario, you've got the antisocial student, and I realise these are very sort of generic terms for these very broad processes and situations and people, but just for simplification, you've got the antisocial student in a pro-social environment, and here the student might be motivated to break the rules, but pressure from the school environment around them, including the presence of pro-social peers or teachers, that might cause them to consider their actions, and at that point, the threat of sanctions, deterrence, things like that may help them decide how to act. So notice that this last situation is the only kinds of scenario where the different kinds of controls that were being discussed in that Twitter conversation, that's the only kind of situation where those controls are actually relevant at all to the outcome. So in this case, individuals with pro-social rules, they either behave because they don't consider doing otherwise and nothing is in their environment is telling them to do otherwise, or because the environment is encouraging them to do something else, but their own self-control helps them stick true to their morals. And it's that helps them to behave in the way that we want to see in schools. Controls and deterrents such as supervision, surveillance, detentions, sanctions, all those kind of things, they can be crucial to some young people's behavioural decisions, but these deterrents are likely ineffectual for the children in the antisocial settings that encourage rule breaking, certain places in school, but also outside of school. Further, bear in mind that in schools, we can't supervise children all the time. Students also know that sometimes they can get away with stuff, and often they don't even care. So this means it doesn't make sense to rely on these controls in schools, sanctions, supervision, and so on to ensure good behaviour. Instead, situational action theory suggests that such controls are sometimes actually totally irrelevant to behavioural decision making. So although there is a role for those controls in schools, they are often relied upon too heavily, and instead there are more fundamental things that we can do to combat behaviour in schools. First off, before we move on to SATNAV, let's have a look at the empirical evidence very briefly. I'm just focusing on evidence that has been conducted testing SAT in schools, and there's 3 recent studies that do that, 2 of which are based on PhD research carried out here at the Institute. The first one of those is a study by Laura Kennedy of aggression across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire schools, and Laura found that when students who think aggression is okay were surrounded by similarly antisocial students, that resulted in the highest levels of aggression in schools. And then Dr. Liam McSharry, also a student of the centre, he conducted a study of schools in Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire and North London, and he studied student morality, school moral climate, and when it came to crime in schools, so this is particularly rare, you don't often get actual crimes happening in schools, not just rule breaking, he found that crimes in schools were only committed by students with antisocial moral rules in schools with an antisocial moral climate, which, in short, he found that crime in schools appears to require both the student and the school to have antisocial moral rules. So the implications of these studies are clear, and I've put some quotes up here. In short, to prevent rule-breaking behaviour in schools, schools should primarily focus on strengthening the moral rules of their students and their school environments. So moral rules are fundamental and primary, and the controls are secondary and often irrelevant. So the most positive, most long-lasting, most fundamentally effective way to ensure pro-social behaviour in schools is to ensure all school environments, including the staff and students present in those environments, are imbued with a positive pro-social values, and to ensure that all developing students in those environments come to truly believe in and internalise those pro-social moral values and carry them with them. And by developing the moral rules and the moral emotions and decision-making skills of students in this way, this also has implications for their behaviour choices outside of school as well, both after school in their communities, but also into their adulthood and futures. So the theoretical background is the major foundation for SATNAV, but there are also additional aspects to our approach that characterise the project. So I'm just going to talk about a few of those now. We refer to those as golden threads running through SATNAV. So the first of these is researcher-practitioner collaboration. Neither Nima or I have a background in education, nor do we directly work with young people beyond our research fieldwork. So not only were practitioners integral to the beginning of the project, as I mentioned, but also some parts of SATNAV were actually already being developed in some of the schools that we spoke to before we got involved, and we'll discuss that more in a minute. We're also regular attendees and contributors to the Leadership Partners Schools Conference, which is a network of senior school leaders who share knowledge and experience and best practice. And practitioner collaboration is central throughout SATNAV, including the development, the implementation, and the evaluation of every single SATNAV component. And this is just 2 articles that demonstrate these collaborations. The next aspect of our approach is called global learning, which we knew nothing about, but learnt a lot about from our key practitioner partner school, Commonweal. Global learning is a pedagogy and ethos that some schools adopt as a kind of guiding framework and principles throughout their pastoral activities and curriculum. Global learning is essentially about preparing our young people to go out into the global world we live in and be successful. So it is about helping them to get the skills and qualifications they'll need in a global marketplace, but it's also about preparing them with other skills and abilities such as conceptual understanding, critical thinking, and empathy. So how is this relevant to SATNAV? Well, we're conducting research into how these kind of skills and abilities underpin certain aspects of moral development and decision-making skills that are central to SATNAV. And ultimately, along with the global learning principles, SATNAV supports schools to grow young people who will continue to make the right behavioural choices both after 3 p.m. in their communities and post-16 into their futures. There's a more practical reason for why we need to adopt these kind of principles, and that's because SATNAV to work needs to be fully embedded within a school, and therefore we need to be cognizant of the other competing demands and priorities of a school, and not just behavioural management. So we need SATNAV to align with those school principles and priorities to make it more possible that schools are able to adopt the SATNAV programme. And since SATNAV aims to develop rather than control young people with benefits far beyond behaviour in school, SATNAV fits within this global learning ethos. So we've ensured that the principles of SATNAV fit within this kind of principle so that it's easier for schools to adopt our programme. So monitoring and evaluation is the third golden thread. It's fundamental. It's baked in from the start. We do not offer any delivery of any SATNAV component without evaluation. And this is because we want to make sure we're doing what we think we're doing and that we're not doing harm. We have an ethical responsibility, but also we're making sure we're making the best use of resources to have the best outcomes for the young people. We're open to change and even abandoning the whole ship if the evaluation evidence says that we should. So there are 2 processes of evaluation that we conduct. The first one is process evaluation. This is more relevant in the early stages and development and pilot stages, but also relevant to any future rollout should this go larger scale. And it is definitely dependent on practitioner collaboration and participant voices. The second kind of evaluation is the impact evaluation, and here we need to be really careful about what we expect. What kinds of size of effects are we expecting? How we're going to be able to capture those effects? What additional effects we might see or any negative effects? There's also a lot of complexity to this, so we're having to develop new measures for evaluation as we go. And we're also hoping to make some of our evaluation independent or semi-independent. So, for example, we've engaged the help of Dr. Alex Sutherland, who many of you might know, at the University of Oxford, who's a evaluation expert, but particularly in the field of education. The programme is multi-component, SATNAV, as I'll introduce in a moment. This means that there is unique difficulties with evaluating a multi-component programme. They're all at different stages. They're not all in all of our schools. And this makes it super difficult to evaluate. What we're hoping is in the future, once it's fully developed, the SATNAV programme will be available as a whole and then will be evaluated as a whole. But for now, we're attempting to evaluate each programme component as we go. And the fourth golden thread is that we're mindful to point out how looking after young people is really important to SATNAV. The scientific rigour can sometimes make things seem impersonal. So, for example, in the theory presented, it seems so removed from real people's lives. But actually, we believe that an analytic approach is the best way to get the most impactful and the safest outcomes for our young people. And a caring approach is actually inherent in the theoretical foundations of situational action theory, whereby we prioritise development over controls, and our overarching aims are fundamentally child-centred. In fact, we believe that although caring practice is necessary, it is not sufficient for good, effective practice. And ultimately, like many of the practitioners we work with and have come across, we very much care about the young people as real people, and that's ultimately why we're doing all of this. So that's the background and our approach. So now I'm going to move on to the SATNAV components. SATNAV, as I've mentioned a few times, is made up of multiple components. These will come as a bundle eventually, but while they're still under development, we're trialling them individually and in various ways. Visually, it's going to look a bit like this. So first off, we've got strengthening the moral rules of students and school environments. Note, this is a really rare feature of interventions. It's because it's rooted in situational action theory where that person-environment interaction is important. But it's not usual to get both of those within one intervention. Then we have the skills and enforce components which support each of those. And then we have school-wide components that support successful implementation and the success of all the other components. So we're going to talk about each of these in turn. And starting with SATNAV Compass, which is the individual component that Nima is going to talk about now.
Okay, so hi everybody, welcome and thank you for being here today, and welcome to everybody online. So I created the Compass project 4 or 5 years ago, although as Beth mentioned, she and I have worked in this subject field for almost 20 years now. Compass had already existed and had been trialled in a youth centre, and at which point Beth invited me to adapt Compass for the school setting. So it's the most developed part of the relatively newly created SATNAV project. So our research associate, Megan Huggett, who I think is with us online today, joined us early this year and can take credit for the expert running of the project day to day. So and just to mention, so far we've had 20+ research staff members working on the project over the last few years. So a big thank you for them for all their contributions. So here's what I'll be covering today. I'll give you a short background to the study, how it's designed, importantly, what it is and how we deliver it. I'll summarise our completed trials. I'll outline our process evaluation. And finally, whilst the pre and post survey data will be analysed early next year, today I'll offer some qualitative impact measures that indicate some effectiveness of the programme. So you can find further information in these publications, and likewise more detailed information can be found on the project website. At the end today, there'll be a link to a Microsoft form where you can sign up and we can send you this information if you're interested. So, what is Compass? It aims to develop moral and social emotional skills to young people. And how do we do this? We invite students to come to small group, once weekly sessions during a term time, consisting of various interactive activities. And in 2022, the Compass programme was piloted in a youth centre here in Cambridge. Some of you local to the area might be familiar with Romsey Mill. And there's a photo of our pilot research team here on the right-hand side. Emma Crook co-authored one of the Compass publications and made a significant contribution to this pilot work. So since the pilot, the Compass has grown very quickly over time as part of this newly formed SATNAV Compass component of the wider SATNAV study. And by the end of next term, we will have completed 11 trials across year 7 to 9 in 4 schools. And we've recently had 2 new schools sign up for summer term delivery next year. So Beth has already introduced some of the theoretical and empirical base for the approach. The programme activities themselves are evidence informed, looking very closely at what does and doesn't produce effective youth outcomes and why. And we're currently drafting an activity justifications report, which outlines the evidence base that informed the creation for each task in the programme. And you might be thinking that you've come across many school-based interventions over the years. What we're doing here is unique. So here's one review of our review of the effectiveness of empathy interventions, for example, that we conducted to inform the development of our activities. In addition to that theory and evidence-led approach, scientific rigour is baked into all aspects of what we do. So, for example, we deliver Compass using an RCT design with a control group, with a crime propensity matched control group, and we've recently developed a comprehensive and interactive facilitator training module. We meet with our school collaborators weekly, and we continue to learn from them, which is really valuable to us. I think we have some of our school practitioners with us today, so a special mention and welcome to them. So who attends the Compass programme? So we identify those in a given year group who may benefit most from the programme. We do this by rank ordering by crime propensity scores using this full year group survey of PADS Plus validated scales. In the near future, we hope to be able to deliver and evaluate the programme longitudinally so we can follow and support young people as they progress through secondary school and offer annual repeat Compass programme deliveries. To assess the impacts, we can do 2 things and probably more. So first, we can carry out these pre and post surveys with the programme and control groups. We also plan to analyse school collected data. So for example, truancy behaviour, exclusions, punishments, reward points, and so on. Quantitative impacts evaluation is crucial, but while we're in these early trial stages, we're exploring which measures can accurately measure this impact, the impact that we're hearing about anecdotally week to week from our facilitators, from our young people. So we plan to finish refining our content and the delivery based on the learnings from these current and past trials. Sometimes we feel in a rush to catapult to this impact testing phase, but we want to go about this properly, methodically, and that requires this quite extended trial phase with a lot of work and resource. So what do students do in these weekly sessions? We cover these core concepts in line with the theoretical explanations, including SATs, of which factors assist us when it comes to rule-breaking decision-making. For example, moral rules, moral empathy, moral emotions, empathy, emotion management and regulation, and peer resistance relates to self-control, also an important part of the SAT framework. So I've written a suite of 25 plus bespoke activities, some examples of which can be seen here. The tasks include various interactive activities, moral dilemmas, either real life or fictional, discussions, reflections, including movement around the room and deliberately not involving any reading or written work of any kind. Participants receive a don't tell me, but show me approach to offer new skills for them when they come to make decisions in potential rule-breaking situations. And the situations we develop over time, they're situations that they tell us that they may find themselves in their day-to-day lives. So this is what a typical Compass handbook looks like. It's available in the form of a facilitator script that I've written, so it can be adjusted to suit the natural style of the facilitators, and it includes pre and post session activities for the facilitators, record keeping prompts that we give them. We take a lot of data from them. For example, they give a rating of task focus, engagement, and enthusiasm for every participant for every session. And the programme is copyrighted, but it's available for use in any organisations that work with youth. Next, I'll give you some information about our existing Compass trials. So this map lists our past, current, and possible future trials. We have 5 study sites, one of which is the pilot study at the youth centre. This should say 2022 here, not 2023, the pilot was then. And in total, we've delivered the programme to around 200 students in the programme group, with roughly equal numbers in the control groups. And our goal is to recruit more diverse schools as we go on. Early next year, we begin our first international trial at an alternative education unit in China, being led by Institute alumna Dr. Joya Jun, who some of you may know. You can see that Compass is growing very fast, sometimes faster than we can keep pace with. Whilst we're in this preliminary design and testing phase, process evaluation is a core component of the work. So it helps us to better understand what is required to make this collaboration with schools work effectively. And here are some examples of the data, the kinds of data that we collect from each trial. If we can compare across different diverse trial sites, different year groups, we can examine the potential for wider scalability of the programme. So we find a variety of positive indicators as part of our extensive process evaluations. So our school Compass facilitators report that practically the delivery itself is generally smooth and enjoyable. They welcome a fresh approach, having delivered or heard about many school interventions in the past. And for example, they describe this work as a real step forward. And you'll hear some more about that in a video from one of our facilitators in a moment. Compass facilitators also report that young people want to be there and they don't want the programme to come to an end. So systematically measuring whether young people feel enthusiastic and enthused, reported by both youth themselves and by their facilitators, and collecting this, for example, at the end of session feedback and the post surveys, is really important as a crucial first step before we can begin to assess the impact. Young people tell us that they really enjoy coming along to the programme generally, which we know can be difficult to achieve for groups that are experiencing potential difficulties both inside and outside of school. We've heard some moving accounts of how young people feel safe and secure and able to share their experiences and perceptions in a way that they might not have had the opportunity to do so in the past. Compass facilitators also report that participants comment on the uniqueness of Compass compared to other programmes that they've been to in the past. So this is taken from a facilitator at a different school. Facilitators indicate that they're seeing these students who are often labelled as problematic in a different light, showing a calmer and more engaged facet to their personalities than the school staff have seen before. And before I play this next video, recorded by one of our Compass facilitators. Sorry, Steve, I think you were here earlier on. So I'll introduce you to Steve. Steve was employed as a facilitator for our very first school trial and is just about to finish his 4th Compass trial. He was selected, he's a teaching assistant at the school. The SLT at the school deemed him to be a suitable facilitator. He recorded this video actually for us to share with new Compass facilitators at newly recruited schools.
Hello, my name is Stephen Hampshire and I'm a facilitator for the Compass project. We have delivered the Compass project to over 70 students this year, delivering to year 9, year 8 and year 7. And I've worked in schools for the last 15 years in secondary schools, behaviour units and pupil referral units, and I've delivered lots and lots of behaviour interventions over that time. All of which are much for muchness, but the Compass project is quite different in so many ways. The Compass project is preventative rather than reactionary. This is not an intervention for those students with the most behaviour points. So this in turn stops the project from becoming a tick in the box in a vulnerable student's journey towards potential exclusion. The sessions are extremely well planned and are interactive. Topics covered include bullying, empathy, confrontation, self-esteem, peer pressure, and they're delivered through student debate, students' personal experiences, through videos, music, drawing tasks, games, like I said, very, very interactive. However, success comes down to, like pretty much every intervention I've ever done before, success comes down to building a positive relationship with every student, finding out who responds well to positive praise, to humour, to questioning, or even to snacks or sweets. It's remembering who goes to dance, who supports Tottenham Hotspur, who's got a Labrador called Sunny. It's creating a friendly and upbeat atmosphere whilst reinforcing the clear group boundaries and guidelines, such as when we do debating, it's a one voice only policy. When we're sharing our views and opinions, you must respect one another's views. Even if you don't agree with it, there's a good way and a bad way of agreeing with them or not, or disagreeing with them. I would also say, as a facilitator, have fun with this. Lots of the tasks tend to veer off on a tangent, depending on student reaction or student debate or students' personal experiences. But as long as the focus remains somehow relevant to the initial task, then I would encourage this. I've had some of the most amazing student breakthroughs and conversations, some of which have made me question my own personal practices. Anyway, I hope you enjoy delivering the Compass project as much as I have over the past year. Good luck.
So our school senior leaders now report that this type of theoretically informed, evidence-backed, rigorously delivered and evaluated approach is much needed, and for that reason they're able to offer their limited resource to contribute to the running of the programme. So next, are there any early indications that the programme is actually effective? So our young people express that they find the Compass programme useful, specifically in the areas that we wish to focus on, those areas that we know are linked to rule-breaking behaviour. Specifically in relation to morality, for example, when I get into a negative spiral, I now know how to get my way out. Empathy, it's helpful to learn how to recognise how people feel. And next year, we'll have findings from our quantitative impact evaluation to share with you. So looking to the future, it looks exciting. We're receiving more interest and demand from schools than we're currently able to meet. We're applying for grants to allow us to meet this demand. We continue to make tailored adaptations where required, be flexible around school-specific processes and situations, which can be quite unique, we're learning. We're moving in other exciting directions. So, for example, Chris is trialling some VR content as part of the programme, and we're delivering the first international trial next year. So that's the end of the SATNAV compass component for the time being. Next, I'll very briefly talk to you about the SATNAV skills component of the wider SATNAV study. So skills is a programme that we're developing. Our partner school, Commonweal, have been delivering as a pilot and creating. Based on the work that's being done there, the objective is to equip all students with a universal delivery, including but not limited to those students receiving the Compass programme, for example. It's to equip them with the broader skills needed to support their moral decision making and moral development. So the 4 skills of reasoning, communication, self-management and teamwork are identified by that global learning approach that we mentioned earlier on. And this time, these skills are embedded rather than taught as lessons. Commonweal, the pilot, are measuring the individual demonstration of these skills in their students, so they can assess this using 4 levels that students may progress through, with beginning, developing, applying and leading. And we'll share more about this as it develops over time in future. Okay, next, Beth is going to talk to you about climate and the rest.
Thank you. So yeah, this is now a little bit different because this is the climate aspect of SATNAV, which you may remember is about the moral context now. So switching from people to context. Where Compass targets the personal development of a targeted group of individuals, conversely, Climate is a school-wide programme aimed at developing primarily the moral context or the values culture or the climate of the whole school, but necessarily also the individuals within it. One thing to note here in relation to the idea of moral context of action and development is that situational action theory reminds us that whilst pupils are making decisions and acting within the environments in school, it is also a place where they are developing over time, and in the case of schools, often over many crucial adolescent years. So in terms of activities, as Nima said, while Compass sessions are bespoke sessions involving specifically designed small group tasks and activities, for the climate component, the moral values discussions are embedded throughout the school. I'll explain more about that in a moment. First, which values? So the particular values selected for the climate programme are those that embody the key components identified by situational action theory research, but also those values that are prerequisites for the development and expression of those values. The values research shows that values, as in the words for them, can be grouped into families and by meaning, many of which are then synonyms for each other. And this means that without losing integrity, climate can specify the kinds of values to include, but still allow schools some freedom over the specific wording. And this is important for practical reasons. First, while climate must still retain its integrity, it must also align with school needs, as I mentioned earlier. So it might include values that are important for the wider values of the school, such as global learning and so on. And also, as this picture shows, this is a picture from our pilot school Commonweal where they were doing values work. This shows how staff and students should be involved in the process of adopting the climate programme from the beginning to ensure student and staff buy-in and to facilitate true embeddedness. So what does climate look like and how does it function in a school? Because they were already doing values work in their school when we met them, the Commonweal School have functioned actually as a delivery and development partner, but also as a pilot. So we've learned a lot from them, from their implementation. And the key to climate is embeddedness. Firstly, it's really important to involve others in the implementation of climate from the beginning. And this involves using staff training time to give staff the proper time to understand why these values are important. In fact, Nima and myself have visited Commonweal a number of times to speak to the staff about why these values are important. And it also to give staff proper time to readjust their teaching resources and develop their values curriculum within faculties. Parents are actually also often forgotten, but research, Leah McSharry's research actually shows that parental alignment with school policies and values is crucial for school climate. Another point is consistent language and branding, and this is just an example of how Commonweal did that. But it's important that to have visibility throughout the school, not just classrooms, not just posters on a wall, but badged on all teaching resources, website communications, awards, activities. It should be visible to staff and students, but also parents on letters home and outwards into the community. Finally, the biggest part of the embeddedness is frequent, meaningful engagement with these values. And in terms of the curriculum, and this is probably the most unique part of climate, it means a meaningful class-based discussion of at least one value as an embedded part of every lesson, including all curriculum topics. This includes moral dilemmas or debates on the topic of the lesson, or discussion about how specific values relate to the content of the lesson or experience of the lesson. And Commonweal worked very closely with faculty heads and staff on how to achieve this, and it's not easy. It takes a huge time commitment and a buy-in from all staff. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But Commonweal is certainly reporting that is proving really worth it from their point of view. Then within student support, the values form core part of discussions around behaviour and student support interventions, including programmes like Compass, which is effectively within a school comes under the student support part of what the school offers. And values are also engaged with during assemblies, pastoral programme for school and extracurricular activities. So where are we at with the evaluation process of the climate pilot? So before we can even think about the effects of the programme, we must consider whether we've effectively implemented the programme as intended, and how we can improve at this development stage. So by recording absolutely everything as we go, we've been learning from the process at the Commonweal pilot, which is going to be crucial for the future trials in other schools. And we've also learned from Commonweal about how best to monitor staff and monitor whether staff are actually embedding the values discussions in their lessons, compliance effectively. We're helping the school also to evaluate that and find new ways to monitor, but also engage their staff. Interestingly, compliance is a harsh word, but compliance has been pretty good. It's just been a few individual staff members who've been quite resistant, and they tend to fall into particular faculties. Understandably, in some cases, faculties where you can imagine it's harder to embed those values, like a session on Pythagoras in maths, for example, is a lot harder to get a values-based discussion than sociology lesson or something. But we're working on ways that we can still manage that across the school. And of course, we've got impact evaluation built in. We developed a moral climate survey, which includes the first validation of the school moral climate scale that was developed by Liam in his thesis, along with a range of other PADS-based scales. And we've now conducted those surveys pre and post the climate pilot. We're in the process of analysing that data literally pretty much as we speak. And also there'll be continual surveys ongoing to monitor that over time. And we're aiming here to not only get a sense of any change in the moral climate, but we're also crucially at this stage trying to learn about how best to measure impact. So as we go, we are also, and we've got additional school data outcomes, as Nima was talking about, attendance, behaviour measures and so on. But we're also developing new measures of impact as we go, which are in some cases quite responsive. Some are theory-led, but some are responsive to what the school are reporting changes that they're actually seeing, that we want to try and quantify and understand. And so we're developing new measures, including within schools, but also in future we would like to develop a programme where we use schools who don't have climate as controls for the schools that do. So next to come from climate is the production of a handbook, which we're working on at the moment together with our Commonweal partners, ready for use in schools, other schools that want to introduce the programme. And that hopefully those additional trials are coming soon with schools that are interested, and as well, of course, as the outcomes of the process and impact evaluations, which are also coming. So that's climate. Now I'm going to move on to Enforce. So Enforce is the programme that then supports the moral climate. So it's enforcing the moral rules of the climate, which the structure comes from situational action theory. So despite the evidence for only the conditional relevance of controls, such as sanctions and detentions and surveillance and things like that I presented earlier, we know that these are often irrelevant for behaviour, as I presented, but of course we also all know that schools still need a system of enforcement and controls, especially in the case of schools where problem behaviour has become endemic, and we're sadly increasingly hearing of how staff and students are often at risk of harm. So of course a strong behaviour policy is important, but this behaviour policy can be proportional, and it can still share the same goals as the rest of the SATNAV programme and the wider goals, for example, of wider pedagogy such as global learning. So we're not aiming for perfectly well-behaved silent children who are exceeding their grade targets. So the key features of this kind of behaviour policy would be an emphasis on protecting staff-student relationships, de-escalation and caring practice, but within a clear and consistent behaviour management procedures. Such behaviour policies that share the goals of SATNAV are already in use actually in some of our partner schools. So we're going to be working with expert practitioners to use that knowledge to develop a template behaviour policy for use in our SATNAV schools. And this will also draw upon key learnings from criminological deterrence literature. And SATNAV Enforce is in its infancy, so we'll also be devising ways to evaluate metrics, for evaluation metrics from the beginning as we go. And next, moving on, these are quite swift because obviously Compass and then Climate are the biggest parts of the programme. So schools, like any institutions, are complex systems with many interrelated parts. And for these reasons, and perhaps unlike many other kind of more piecemeal interventions that we see, we wouldn't expect that the individual component parts of SATNAV would necessarily be either possible to implement or successful or long-lasting without these system supports. So that's what Global is about. And Global aims to provide those supports. So many examples of the kinds of support that we think are required have become apparent in our discussions with practitioners, or they're things that we have noticed that are already in place in these schools that seem essential to the implementation and perhaps success of some of the programmes. So these include the following examples of some of the kinds of programmes we're considering developing as part of Global. For example, relating to pedagogy and policies, staff training, recruitment, leadership, data collection. We don't want to develop these programmes from scratch. More, we want to seek out existing evidence-based, expert-developed, practitioner-validated, ethos-aligned programmes that might collaboratively become part of SATNAV, and as was already the case with, for example, Compass, which was already in existence when I started thinking about SATNAV. And these are a work in progress, but one component of SATNAV Global that is already existing and is becoming part of the SATNAV family is ready for its first use in trials, and that is SATNAV Relate. I'm just going to talk to you about that one now. SATNAV Relate is an existing, extensive, intensive staff training programme in staff-student relationships. The existing programme is called Engage in Learning, and it was developed for Cambridge University by the Institute's own Caroline Lansky, who was here earlier and unfortunately had to nip off, and our previous colleague, Ingrid Obsuth, who's now at the University of Edinburgh. And Ingrid is a clinical psychologist with extensive experience of school environments and research into secondary school exclusions. And they've developed this programme in collaboration with Cambridge University. And they've agreed to collaborate with SATNAV to adapt their programme for use in secondary schools, which I'm really excited about. The programme already has existing evaluation measures built in that we can use in the form of a relationship survey. This it's a highly interactive and engaging course, and it teaches staff about the preventative power of positive staff-student relationships. It involves 3 intensive sessions with those 2 colleagues I mentioned in a group of around 8 to 12 practitioners. Each of the sessions are a month apart with homework, time for reflection, and to work on examples in between. Participants build on their own experiences and those of others in the session to develop specific techniques and skills for building and maintaining strong relationships, even under pressure, such as when managing particularly challenging behaviour. And our school practitioners tell us that skills and techniques for managing behavioural relationships and maintaining relationships when under those extreme pressures in the moment is a real training need that they are really looking for. And for that reason, we already have some of our partner schools interested in trialling the first trial of SATNAV Relate. So that is all of the components, as you can see, some of which are further along the journey than others. I'm just going to talk to you a bit now about some of our future plans and opportunities. So we have some fairly big blue sky ideas for the future. Some ideas like adapting SATNAV for other institutions such as young offenders institutions or the police and even commercial business. But we also have some exciting opportunities that are actually already in the pipeline. Nima mentioned the translation for use in the school in China. And we've also having a request for adaptation of the programme, but unfortunately we don't have the funding to do this yet, for use in secure hospitals in the USA. What's nice about that is that they offer different settings, but they obviously also offer the possibility of studying the cross-national applicability of the SATNAV programme. Coming down to earth a little bit though, other applications that seem possible and fruitful are adapting SATNAV for primary schools, which I'm really interested in, where arguably some of these processes are even more fundamental, and also heading back into non-school youth settings, such as Nima mentioned, youth charity settings like Romsey Mill in Cambridge, where Compass began, but also youth offending service. But actually, when we get back to our desks, really what we need to focus on and our most immediate priorities are some of the things you've heard about today. They are growing the project as it is in various ways, but also developing, implementing and evaluating each component, securing funding, which is always a bit of a nightmare, and producing output. So we've got lots of work to do. So that's all we've got to present to you today. And as Nima said, there's a QR code on the slide there, or you can always contact us to sign up for updates, more information, resources, to receive a recording of today's talk, hopefully. And there's an MS Forms link on there to do that.